सिर्फ एक गम ने जिंदगी को जाविये क्या किया। जाविये यानी दो दिशाओं के बीच की जो कभी दिशा निकल कर आती है उसे हम जाविये कहते हैं। दिए सिर्फ एक गम ने जिंदगी को जाविये क्या किया, जली एक लौ से शम्मे किस कदर आहिस्ता आहिस्ता। वेल टाइकॉन 2023 से आहिस्ता आहिस्ता सारी रह गुजर महक उठी है, सारी सभा में खुशबू आहिस्ता आहिस्ता पहुंच चुकी है। हमने तो बस एक लौ जलाई थी, उस लौ से शम्मे कई जल चुकी है आहिस्ता आहिस्ता। नमस्कार, गुड मॉर्निंग। आई एम निहारिका भुवानिया विद यू, प्रोफेशनल एंकर एंड ओकेजनली रेडियो जॉकी। और जैसे मोतियों की माला एक धागे से बंधी होती है, वैसे ही धागा बन के आपकी सूत्रधार के रूप में मैं सभा को बांध के रखने की कोशिश करूंगी। आप मेरा साथ दीजिएगा, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगेगा। On that note, I warmly welcome you to the 8th edition of TIECON Chandigarh 2023. Let's clap to that. Let's raise a toast to that. And this year, we are ready to innovate, to leave an impact and invest all that we have in our journeys. Now, as has been traditional for the past few years, TIECON Chandigarh happens to be the biggest entrepreneurial event in the northern region. We focus on opportunities, we focus on challenges faced by young and emerging entrepreneurs, and also ensure that we bring into practice the pillars of TIE, of mentoring, of networking, of education, incubation, and investing. And as you can see, innovating, leaving an impact, and investing are ingrained in the very ethos of TIE, and that's also the theme for this year. तो आज की शुरुआत करते हैं उनसे who is our anchor for everything behind the scenes. चाहे आसमान गिर जाए पर वो होते हैं तो हम कभी ना घबराएं. He is absolutely calm in all sorts of situations and under all sorts of pressures and storms, and I guess being a sports enthusiast is probably his secret mantra for that. Now he has a rich experience of 18 years in corporate and family businesses in India and the USA. And he has also been a part of Young Indians as a Chandigarh chapter head. He's represented India at the G20 Young Entrepreneur Summit in Moscow. Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. That's how I would like to sum up his keen interest in education. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now hear it from the director of Learning Path School, Mohali, and the current president of TIE Chandigarh 2022-23, Mr. Robin Agarwal. Over to you.
Thank you, Niharika, for a warm welcome. I've had a very interesting journey of TIE. I started as a TIE volunteer in Boston in 2003 as a volunteer, and today I'm here welcoming you to the 8th edition of TIECON in the 20th year of TIE Chandigarh. For TIE Chandigarh, we started in 2003, and it's been a journey of ups and consistent ups only, right? And we've had a lot of interesting moments over the last 20 years. We've made an impact in the entire ecosystem, and the proof of that is by the people and by the stakeholders that are present here today. A warm welcome to all our speakers and speaking dignitaries. We have a very good presence from the Punjab government, and thank you to all our sponsors for believing in us, for giving this opportunity to hosting this event again. And a large shout out to TIE members. For a TIE president, this is pretty much the culmination of the year, an important landmark in one's journey. And TIE members make it successful for every president. So thank you, TIE members, and a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Well, 20 साल बेमिसाल जिंदगी में ये मौके आए बार बार. तो चलिए आज के पहले पैनल और कॉन्वर्सेशन की तरफ बढ़ते हैं. Humans were never meant to stay in one place. If we did, we would have roots, not feet. I believe travel is intrinsic to life. चाहे फिर कश्मीर से कन्याकुमारी जाना हो या 7 समंदर पार का ट्रिप लगाना हो, या फिर स्टार्टअप से IPO तक का सफर तय करना हो. और हर सूरत में make my trip makes our trip. It's become an irreplaceable verb in our lives, right? So आज भी हम उन्हीं के साथ स्टार्टअप से IPO तक का सफर तय करेंगे. चलिए फिर कुर्सी की पेटी बांध लीजिए. आपको आज के पहले फेलो ट्रैवलर से मिलवाती हूँ. A veteran of the internet industry, he leads strategy and operations of the MakeMyTrip group, including the management of all business units within the organization. Few of us also know that he played a key role in executing a successful merger between MakeMyTrip and IBBO Group. He also acts as a mentor to the senior management team and other high potential team members within the MakeMyTrip organization. A recipient of many awards, including the Bloomberg Award for the Best CFO in India in 2010. He is the man who led the initial public offering of MakeMyTrip with successful listing on NASDAQ in US in 2010. And not only that, apart from being the founding team that built MakeMyTrip ground up, he is a believer of India's digital opportunity and a backer of many young Indian tech companies that are raring to make their mark. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Rajesh Magow, founder, MakeMyTrip. And now, for our next Hamra, for our next fellow traveler, our moderator, ग्रेसिटी इंटरैक्टिव के फाउंडर और सीईओ के तौर पे ये अपनी टीम को ना केवल मेंटोर करते हैं, बट ही ऑल्सो ड्राइव्स सेल्स एंड सपोर्ट टू फोर्ज अहेड इन द एज ऑफ डिजिटल नेटिव्स. In fact, he's been building a community for the largest online marketing companies, the most complex software products, and the earliest outsourced product development out of India for more than 3 decades now. Previously, at Terracin, he enabled software companies to use the India cost advantage without any quality disadvantage. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the past president of TIE Chandigarh and founder, CEO, Gracity Interactive, Mr. Alok Ramsusaria. Over to you.
मेरी एक ही गुजारिश है, हम तो घर वाले हैं यार, बाहर वालों की तारीफ किया करो.
Actually, बाहर वालों के लिए भी काफी embarrassing हो जाता है. This is the only part that I don't like in the discussions.
So, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see a full house, and we will try and cover a lot of ground. How many of you know when MakeMyTrip started? Guess? पीछे से प्रताप sir? Yeah, 2000, right out after the dot-com bust. 2020, they started in 2000. 23 years later, Rajesh, who was part of the original journey, is still here. Deep is still there. KU is still there. Out of the 4 co-founders, 3 are still actively involved with the organization. And here, when we talk to youngsters, we talk about organizations which are, built to the next funding round. So I will start with that, Rajesh, and talk about the philosophical difference about building an organization which is built to last versus built to flip.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Excited to be here, and thanks, Alok. No, I think it's a very pertinent question, to say the least, because if you really see even MakeMyTrip history, in many ways it's still pretty young because internet ecosystem is still evolving, and best is yet to come. But yet we would have already spent over 2 decades in the market. So and that I think tells the story, right? So how do you actually think about building the businesses for really, really long-term view, rather than just thinking about, building or starting the startup and thinking, of course there are going to be steps involved in it, right? So there are going to be phases and steps involved in it. But what is very important is to see, are you really thinking about, like a 5-year journey, which is the way typically, I'm sure you would be familiar with. if you go and ask for funding, the investor will, and people will say, okay, investor has a horizon of 3 years or 5 years, and maybe maximum that I've seen that people say, we are long only investors, etc., and they will stretch it to 7 years perhaps. But that is really investors' point of view, and they have, their business model, they need to see from their point of view. But for entrepreneurs, if you are getting into it, and I often say this, and which is what sort of we ended up practicing over the years, that, it's a choice that you need to make. You have all kinds of choices in front of you, because, at the end of the day, when you're thinking of setting up a startup, etc., you're competent, you're capable. So that is not an issue at all. And you have plenty of choices. World is open in front of you. Take your time, think through before you make that choice. But if that choice happens to be setting up your own business, being an entrepreneur, then it's a really, really long haul, guys. It is not a short-term, stint. Like I will do it for just because it's a fashion statement to make for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Or I will have a short-term or a mid-term objective and then I'll get out of the business. Or I have an objective to make money and therefore I will do this. It is not about that. Entrepreneurship is to build the businesses for long-term, with a long-term vision, long-term view. Alongside the journey, you will see many ups and downs. But then you will have to be prepared to do that. And that's what I mean by really long-term. And, at MakeMyTrip, that was really the objective. We were not, when we set it up in, as Pratapji said, in 2000, it was actually All Fools Day, 1st April 2000. So we just became 23-year-old adult. The day we started, there was a perfect storm of a kind. When there was .com burst and a 9/11 and a SARS that happened, and whatever tiny funding, that $2 million that we had, we actually lost that. Not only we lost that money, even the VC who funded or who promised us to fund gave us only one tranche, and the second tranche was due. He only shut shop because .com burst had happened, and we were supposed to be .com in an era, mind you, in 2000 to 2006. That was our probably the most challenging phase, but the huge amount of learning, where there was no digitization. I mean, today, I think if I look back, it looks like that it was like 200 years old history. The way we have also evolved, and we should talk about it, the pace and at which it has accelerated. But back then, the internet bandwidth, the digitization ecosystem, the payment gateways, etc., used to be nothing, like literally nothing, absolutely patent. So we were ahead of our time. But guess what? We believed in idea, and we said it is a matter of time. The question was not whether this will take off or not. The question was only when, which effectively means that it is going to be a long-term journey, right? So that would be my first point of view. I think if you really, really want to build the business, get into it from a long-term point of view, be prepared to just really go through all the ups and downs in the life. And as we go along, we should talk about pandemic was another big example of that. But you can't really, get into setting up your own business. And, most of us in the room, would be either entrepreneur or budding entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs and very seasoned. The front row is, by the way, very, very seasoned entrepreneurs already. And they will tell you all of this, or, what I'm just trying to share with you.
So one interesting thing, I think, when we were talking, I discovered that when you started, your founding team was already seasoned executives.
Yeah.
And all of them came from a business background. The big difference is that unlike today, when technology is a celebrated, starting point, business was a starting point for you. Would you say that the fact that your founding team was what it was, that is part of the DNA which has caused you to think very long term?
No, I think it's a very, very good point. Yeah, no, so we were not necessarily fresh off the school. In fact, the most interesting part is that we all met as founding team at MakeMyTrip. We didn't know each other before. So Deep is the one, who I'm sure all of you know. He's the one who founded it. And then then Rajesh Magow came on board, then Keyur Joshi, then Sachin Bhatia came on board. We were a 4-member team. But we met at MakeMyTrip. In fact, among us, we often say that it was probably meant to be, maybe destiny or whatever, right? We were all sort of a rational thinker, but, when you look back and you say, listen, we were not friends in the college, etc. We actually did we went to different colleges, different background and all. We were all professionals. I had about 7-8 years senior position corporate experience before, getting into MakeMyTrip. Deep was vice president GE. I had a long stint. I was heading North Zone of Aptech at that point in time, and the then blue chip, Aptech and NIT used to be the blue chip education companies for whatever it's worth right now. And now people will look back and say, what were you guys teaching at that point in time? There was basic computers that we were teaching at that point in time. And then there was a startup after that where I was just sharing with Alok, just sitting out there, which was, for me, was a dry run for getting into MakeMyTrip or starting the entrepreneur stint, because I quite liked. That was a startup. Even back then, we were trying to do video streaming, believe it or not, to do a Master of Computer Science degree from University of Illinois, from Delhi. It was the Malchamark Center. It was video streaming, and then IIT professors used to sort of supplement or complement the computer science students for them to be able to actually give exactly the same degree, not the correspondence degree. It was from University of Illinois, exactly identical degree. The famous one batch, that graduated from that little university, it was called Quantum Institute, was famously like 30 lakh salary and stuff like that. And it was all in the papers. But it was not scalable, so it didn't really take off. It was also a pretty expensive course. But back then, that was the startup journey. So we were all experienced. Even Keyur had experience before. Keyur and Sachin were relatively younger. Deep and I were same age, same batch actually. He did his MBA, I did my CA. And we came together. I think the point that you're trying to make is really interesting. That, were we able to create the bond within the founding team, which was going to take us following the vision that we had for a really, really long time. I think that's very critical. We were all, and you have to have team which is diverse and complementary skill set, different functional backgrounds and stuff. The way we used to operate was, it was truly, let's say if Deep was leading at that point in time, but it was truly like a founding team with complete amount of ownership, all 4 of us, and dividing the portfolios. When I did, IPO in 2010, 2000 to 2010 was a pretty interesting journey. So if I was the most qualified to take the company public, then I was leading that portfolio. That didn't mean that I could not do operations, or I could not, because before that I was actually doing a business role. So that is how we started to sort of work together and make sure that continues. Because if that does not continue, then that becomes a problem. That becomes a massive disruption. So it's important to have the team together. It's important to have the founding team, binding together, talking the same language, leading from front. And then, as you scale up, then you end up sort of building the next level of team as well. Because that's also, by the way, a very, very important part. Talking about the team, and just make one point and then we can move on to the next one. One of the things that at least over the years that I have seen, interacting with the ecosystem, entrepreneur ecosystem, in fact, mentoring some of the young entrepreneurs. I've been on Flipkart board also for many years. Really, it was an honor and privilege to work with Sachin and Binny as well, and Sachin happens to be this part of the world as well. Over the years, the learning was that that there could be some sort of sometimes differences develop, friction develops, and they're not necessarily able to then manage that altogether. And one of the key reasons for that is that when you have to scale up the company, they don't like to let go. See, we all believe that, I'm the founder or part of the founding team, I should be hold on to stuff. I can tell you, legendary is what Deep sort of did at MakeMyTrip, where from the word go, he was very, very clear that one, he has to hire the better than himself, and two, that the founder will have to keep letting go as we scale up the business. Not necessarily hold on to all the portfolios and do it. You will not be able to do it because you will not be able to scale up the company. You'll have to build the environment of trust and confidence and take it to the next level, not necessarily confined it to that. The founding team will always be where people would look up to. But if you are not able to, if you have to just scale up your company and hire professionals would not be interested in coming in if it turns out to be quote unquote Lala company. And, pardon my word for that, but, quote unquote, right? Because you can't have that sort of culture. You have to then, translate that into a pretty professional culture.
Thanks. I think we are going to jump ahead 10 years to the IPO, right? In 2010, you went IPO, and you went IPO on NASDAQ. One of the few companies, I think the first one I heard was a follow-on offering from Infosys, but you were first to IPO only on NASDAQ. So why did you choose to go on NASDAQ? What were the steps to, and why did you go IPO in the first place? So.
Sure. No, I think it's an interesting story. I don't think there's any forum that I don't get asked this question, especially in the recent context when, India, public or stock market ecosystem is also evolving, investors ecosystem is also evolving, especially to entertain new age consumer tech companies or internet-led companies and the businesses. So let me tell you the story back then what happened. In fact, the interesting story is that our house was divided. When I say a house, our board was divided. In fact, we used to have, and I'm sure you would all know, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, gentleman, the pioneer in this industry as well. When they set up InfoEdge, he used to be on our board. He and Hitesh, sort of formed a formidable combination, still doing very, very well. Again, a very good example of building long-term business and so on. And house was divided essentially, and first I'm addressing whether, why did we go US and not necessarily in India, to do IPO in India or to do IPO in US. And the reason why we ended up actually doing in the US was actually at some level it was pretty simple. And I'll tell you why. Like you said, right? We were eventually the first internet company from India that had gone listed in the US, internet company. Infosys was there before us and all, but internet company there was no, and also B2C company. Now Sanjeev's company, InfoEdge, Naukri.com had got listed in India, but they were more B2B from a business model standpoint, not necessarily B2C, like not directly to the consumer. And as we were sort of doing the analysis and studying on India, in India Stock Exchange, there was no internet stock. And trust you me, at that point in time, either the investor ecosystem or the analyst ecosystem, which is very, very important, or you need to have, investors benchmarking you with the other listed stocks and all that. We had none whatsoever. We had absolutely none whatsoever in India. To make things worse, SEBI has evolved quite a bit today, but back then, SEBI was also evolving. And in the outlook, because of the fact that all the businesses that were going public and getting listed in India were all brick and mortar businesses. There was nothing wrong with it. And that ecosystem was pretty robust. Whether it is investors or retail investors or the HNIs or the analyst or the stock exchange, the regulator. Very, very robust. But when it came to internet business, there was hardly any awareness. When you talk to people, people would not be able to understand, relate with the fact that internet businesses can be loss-making, for some time, but there is still value in that business, right? So they was not able to relate with anything. In comparison to that, when I started interacting with the US ecosystem, it was delightful. It was delightful in terms of their understanding, their investors' appetite, their appetite to stay invested long-term. There were tons of internet B2C companies which were listed in the US, so you didn't have to make that effort to make those comparisons. the benchmarks, the analyst ecosystem was hugely evolved. And here's the best part. I tell you, and this is back in 2010, and now I'm saying that SEBI is fairly evolved, more recently. Regulator, the stock exchange, NASDAQ, the DRHP equivalent out there, when you do the F1 filing out there, which is essentially a prospectus, the scrutiny of prospectus, the quality with which they end up scrutinizing it, and they send you their review notes and the subsequent conversations were absolutely high quality. Absolutely high quality. I used to love those interactions because there will always be observations that they would want to do it, but their scope and objective used to be absolutely clear. They will have professionals that they would have hired as part of NASDAQ who would be reviewing your prospectus, that you can talk to more logically and conceptually, not on whims and fancies. It was a delightful experience in terms of just going through the whole process, getting the approval of the prospectus, and then finding the right opportunity to list. So it was essentially the entire ecosystem back then in 2010 was very, very evolved, which is what is happening now in India after 10 years. So now if there is any Indian company, any Indian internet-led business is ready, then you must consider India as an India ecosystem, India Stock Exchange, because there are other values and benefits of going public in India.
I think one of the questions, think about it, 2000 to 2010, 10 years, startup to IPO. Very fast IPO, if you would say. But post-IPO, now, what would you advise young entrepreneurs? I mean, should you look at an IPO? Should you look at, very quickly, and we are almost out of time, so fast answer there, and then I have a couple of more questions.
Yeah, all right. Okay, very quickly. No, I think it's a great question as well. And that is, whether and when and, what is the real reason for you to go IPO? I think it's a very, very important question, guys. I don't think it is a slam dunk sort of decision. It is not necessarily a fashion statement to make. It is a hugely responsible event for the company, and therefore the objective has to be very, very clear. So what's the objective for the IPO? Are you going to raise more funds? Are you going to just use that platform to raise more funding? Do you really need that funding? Or is the objective to give an exit to the investors? Or are you, by any chance, thinking as an entrepreneur or a founder that we will also get an exit along with that? That perhaps is the biggest mistake that you would end up doing. Because IPO is beginning of the journey, guys. It is not the end of the journey for the founders and the entrepreneurs. I'll tell you a very interesting sort of trivia. When we had a blockbuster IPO, it was really, really received well. We had 89% pop on the day one, and I was wondering what did we do overnight to get 89% jump on day one in India. It was all euphoria, by the way. And, and you seeing some of the euphoria happening in here as well. And we were feeling good about it, but not necessarily super excited about it because we were clear in our head that it is beginning of the journey. It is the more responsibility coming your way as founders and entrepreneurs. We were clear walking into it. It was not necessarily exit. The interesting story is, as the event happened, and you know how they sort of make it publicly, the whole event, the way they will do it, the live telecast, etc. They just really make it look like a massive event, etc., with huge amount of mileage and people watching it live, etc. So it creates a lot of excitement, and they just do it, whatever it feels good for the company and stuff like that. And somebody called me from there and congratulating back in India, and congratulating and saying, good show and all, and fantastic IPO, what's the result, etc. And I was exhausted by then, and it was a good sort of to say, okay, finally the project got over. And I was sounding a bit low, and he asked me, he said, why are you sounding so low? Why are you not so excited about it? And I remember, quote unquote, and I'm not saying it because I'm saying it, I'm just using this example to make the point. And I said, listen, this is just the hype and the euphoria. The project got over and I feel good about it. It was successful and I feel good about it. But this is just the beginning of the journey. This is the same 89% pop. 2 quarters down, if I don't deliver, it's going to come crashing down, which is what is happening. So what is important is that you have alternatives. You should be clear whether you want to go to the public platform to raise money or not. Because the level of scrutiny, the level of disclosures, the level of governance is going to be of a different order. Are you ready for that or not? If you're not ready and you still want to raise money, today there are other options. You can go private, you can, and if you want to exit, then you can look for M&A options and so on and so forth. But do not think IPO just for the sake of doing it, that IPO is the only option.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I think this is sage advice. IPO is the beginning of the journey, not the end of a journey. It's the exit for the investor, not for the founder team. So I think every one of us who's an entrepreneur, that's key advice to take away. And since 2010, we are now in 2023, and we went through, and I was talking to Rajesh back. So profitable, loss making, profit making, IPO, scaling, then pandemic, right? A company which went from $6 billion, $7 billion in GMV, 700 million in turnover to $150 million in turnover. 20%. And is still today thriving. So the pandemic, I think we'll just cover the pandemic and what next, and then we'll wrap up. Sure. So you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. No, like I was just mentioning, and I'll build on that. I was mentioning that you will see the down cycles, guys. I mean, no industry does not see the down cycle. These days, the macro events, the world, happening at the world are actually making these cycles come in more frequently, by the way. It used to be, 4 or 5 years, 10 years, there will be a cycle, etc. Now it's every couple of years. So you got to be ready, you got to be very strong, you got to be resilient, and build sort of core strengths in your business for you to be able to withstand that. Now, talking about pandemic, clearly, like Alok mentioned, right? So we were 7 billion gross booking value, 3,000 people, 3 brands. And back then in 2000, when I was saying Perfect Storm happened, we were very tiny, we were very small. So it was easy for us to be able to do it. Now this time it happened, mother of all, down cycle events, if you will, at a very big scale for us. 3,000 people, 7 billion. And the day lockdown was announced in the country, while full year we were like, whatever, 30% of the pre-pandemic number, which was fiscal year 20, in that quarter we were down by 95%. Now for a public listed company, revenue being down by 95% means something, right? So, obviously it was a crisis situation. So one part of it was managing the crisis. Thankfully, having seen some of the crises, we were not one of those who would panic. Because, and that is the piece of advice, I don't think panic takes you anywhere. It actually takes away the thinking ability completely. What is the need of the hour at that point in time is that you need to act. You can't actually be thinking and analyzing, you need to act on that because you will have to really immediately act on managing the crisis. But I think the learning there was that, every challenge, or every challenging situation, if you can turn that into opportunity. And that is one of the things that we tried to do it. We had huge amount of resources. We had about 1,000 engineers, another 100 product managers who were not doing anything. The business as usual was not happening and revenue. And we decided, and we said, while we will continue to keep managing the crisis, let us see what is going to be the life post-pandemic. At some point in time, that has to end, right? And if it is going to end, how are we going to look like? And we started investing behind hugely, building new capabilities. All the engineers were there. We started building platforms. We got into B2B2C space. We built the corporate platform. We built the fintech platform. We built the adtech platform. I kid you not, in those 2 years, we ended up actually building software like never before. We also launched in GCC market. And now as we come out of it, we have far more capabilities of distribution, become an omni-channel, become a super app for us to be able to just tap into the future, revenue growth. So one part of his recovery, thankfully, God has been kind now. If hopefully COVID is behind us, we are on a run rate of pre-pandemic recovery. But the next level of growth, as we get into this fiscal, there is going to be, huge amount of potential for growth for us, given these capabilities. So therefore, if you are able to look for silver lining, look for turning the challenges into opportunity, that should be the thought process at that point in time.
Great, thank you. I think our time is up, and I do want to take this opportunity to just summarize what Rajesh told us. Startup in adverse times, don't look at an IPO as the exit, it's the start. And build to last. It's possible to build companies without having to go to school together with your founders or any of them being a techie. Amazing success story out of India, first company to list on NASDAQ. Thank you so much, Rajesh, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. You've been kind. Thank you for your patience.